Against all odds, Elias Cross had become what America claimed to celebrate. A self-made success story who transformed his innovative algorithms into Crosstech, a tech empire worth millions. Now the prestigious Winthrop family, with generations of wealth and connections, wanted to acquire his company for $900 million. Their smiles were warm, their handshakes firm, but something lurked beneath their polished veneer. As Elias navigated their lavish Hampton estate, the microaggressions accumulated like storm clouds. Backhanded compliments, assumptions about his background, questions that probed for weakness. His mother had taught him to recognize wolves in sheep's clothing, but he'd come too far to let old prejudices derail this deal. What Elias couldn't anticipate was how public and calculated the Winthrops' true intentions would be, or how walking away from nearly $1 billion would become the most powerful business move of his career. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. The morning sun reflected off the towering glass skyscraper in downtown Manhattan, catching the eye of pedestrians below. Inside, on the top floor, 12 stories above the busy New York streets, Elias Cross sat at the head of a sleek conference table. His tailored navy suit contrasted perfectly with the white documents spread before him. At 42, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had fought for every inch of his success. And with that final signature, gentlemen, we've just completed a $200 million merger. Elias's deep voice filled the boardroom as he capped his fountain. 10, a gift from his late mother, and slid the contract across the polished table. The faces around him broke into relieved smiles and nods of approval. Crosstech Innovations welcomes Wilson Dynamics to the family. The room erupted in applause. Elias stood, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease, and shook hands with the Wilson Dynamics CEO. Cameras flashed, capturing the historic moment for tomorrow's business pages. Later that afternoon, Elias stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. The city that had once seemed so impossibly distant now lay at his feet. On his desk sat a framed Baltimore Sun newspaper clipping. Local boy makes good. Baltimore native Elias Cross, named to Forbes, 30 under 30. Beside it stood a photo of his mother, her proud smile frozen in time. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, turning from the window. Miranda Lynn, his CFO and oldest friend from Harvard Business School, entered with a tablet in hand. At 39, Miranda's sharp mind and unwavering loyalty had helped build Crosstech from a fledgling startup to a Fortune 500 company. "The Wilson merger is trending on Twitter," she said, her dark eyes gleaming with satisfaction. "But that's not why I'm here. The Winthrops just called." Elias's eyebrows rose. "Bradford?" "Crawford himself. The patriarch wants to move up the meeting. About the acquisition, he's offering $900 million, Elias. $900 million. Miranda's voice held a note of awe despite her usual composure. Elias walked to his desk and picked up his mother's photo. "What's the catch?" "They're promising complete autonomy post-acquisition. Crosstech would operate as an independent subsidiary under the Winthrop Group umbrella. All your patents stay under your control. It's the deal of a lifetime." Elias placed the photo down carefully. "The Winthrops don't share power, Miranda. They consume it. Maybe they're changing their approach. Old money has to adapt eventually," Miranda said, though her tone suggested she shared his skepticism. His phone buzzed with a text from his younger brother Dante. "Heard about the Winthrop offer. Call me before you do anything." Elias sighed. Dante ran a non-profit in their old Baltimore neighborhood, providing tech education to underprivileged kids. His brother had always been the family idealist, while Elias had become the pragmatist. "Set up the meeting," Elias told Miranda. "But flag any fine print. I want to know what they're really offering." That evening, Elias drove to his brother's apartment in Brooklyn. Dante's place was modest but warm, walls covered with community artwork, and photos of smiling kids from his program. "The Winthrops?" Dante said as soon as Elias walked in. "Seriously, E?" Elias loosened his tie. It's business, Dante. A $900 million business decision. It's the Winthrops. Old Boston money that built their fortune on the backs of people who look like us, Dante argued, handing his brother a beer. You remember what Dad used to say about families like that. Times change. Business is business, is it? Because I've read about their political donations, their history of acquiring minority-owned businesses and gutting them. They don't want partners, they want trophies. Elias took a long sip of his beer. I've built something valuable. That's the point. The market doesn't see color. Maybe the market doesn't. But the Winthrops do. Dante shook his head. Just be careful. The following week, Elias met the Winthrop family for the first time at their Manhattan offices. Crawford Winthrop III, silver-haired and impeccably dressed in a custom suit that probably cost more than most people's cars, rose from behind an antique desk as Elias entered. Mr. Cross, Crawford said, extending a manicured hand. A pleasure to finally meet the man behind Crosstech's impressive rise. The pleasure's mine, Mr. Winthrop. Elias's handshake was firm and measured. Please call me Crawford. We're potentially going to be partners after all. Bradford Winthrop, Crawford's son and heir apparent, watched from a leather armchair. At 35, Bradford had his father's features but none of his polished charm. His eyes assessed Elias coldly. Bradford, say hello to Mr. Cross, Crawford instructed, as if speaking to a child rather than a grown man. Bradford stood reluctantly. Heard a lot about you, Cross. Impressive what you managed to build from, where was it again? Baltimore? The slight pause wasn't lost on Elias. Thank you. Hard work has its rewards. Vivian Winthrop, Crawford's wife, glided into the room carrying a silver tea service. Her blonde hair was styled in an elegant updo, her pearl necklace catching the light. You must be Mr. Cross, she said with a practiced smile. I've heard. You're quite articulate. Crawford says your presentation at the Tech Summit last year was remarkable. Elias nodded politely, filing away the backhanded compliment. Thank you, Mrs. Winthrop. I appreciate that. A young woman in her late 20s sauntered in behind Vivian. Her resemblance to Bradford marked her as Ainsley Winthrop, the socialite, daughter whose exploits occasionally made page 6. Sorry I'm late, she announced without sounding sorry at all. Her eyes flicked over Elias with unconcealed curiosity. You must be the famous Elias Cross. Did you play football in college? You have the build for it. Basketball, actually, Elias replied smoothly. Though I was at Harvard for their business program, not their sports. Harvard? Ainsley's eyebrows rose. Impressive. The meeting proceeded with discussions of valuations, integration strategies, and market projections. Throughout, Elias noted the subtle ways the Winthrops asserted dominance, interruptions, assumptions, condescending explanations of business concepts he'd mastered years ago. Before we go further, Crawford said as the meeting wrapped up, we'd like to invite you to our family estate in the Hamptons this weekend. A small gathering, just 50 or so of our closest friends and business associates. A chance for you to meet our circle before we finalize anything. I'd be honored, Elias replied, his face betraying nothing of his reservations. Back at Crosstech, Miranda pored over the preliminary contract the Winthrops had provided. Elias, they keep deferring on the patent protection clauses, she said, frustration evident in her voice. And there's language here about performance thresholds that could trigger leadership changes. Flag it. We'll address it at the next meeting, Elias said, reviewing his emails. Are you sure about this? Something feels off. Before Elias could respond, his phone rang. A junior executive from Winthrop Group was calling about logistics for the weekend. Hello, this is Elias Cross. Oh, the voice on the other end sounded surprised. I'm sorry. I was trying to reach Mr. Cross. Is this security? Elias closed his eyes briefly. This is Elias Cross, CEO of Crosstech Innovations. Oh, my apologies. Sir, I didn't expect, I was told, never mind, about the transportation to the estate. After the call, Miranda looked at him knowingly. Not the first time? Not even the 10th, Elias admitted. The day before the Hamptons trip, Elias visited his mother's grave in Baltimore. The humble cemetery was a world away from the gleaming towers and boardrooms of his current life. "I wish you could see it, Mom," he whispered, placing fresh flowers by her headstone. "Everything we talked about, everything you pushed me toward." In his mind, he could hear her voice from years ago. "They'll try to make you feel small, Elias. Don't you ever let them. You walk in and own the room. It's yours if you decide it is." He remembered coming home from school at 12, fighting, back tears after a teacher had accused him of cheating on a math test because his score was too high. His mother had marched down to that school the next day, her waitress uniform still on, and demanded a meeting with the principal. "The world's going to try to put you in boxes," she'd told him that night. "Your job is to break them." On his way back to New York, Elias stopped to see Judge Martha Willoughby, a retired civil rights lawyer who'd mentored him since his teens. Now in her 80s, she still had the sharpest mind he knew. They sat on her porch, drinking lemonade, as the summer evening settled around them. "The Winthrops," she mused, her weathered hands wrapped around her glass. "That's quite the opportunity, Elias." "It's the biggest deal of my career," he acknowledged. She studied him over her reading glasses. "Just remember something, son. Power respects power, but it also hates losing it. Be sure you're the one writing the ending to this story." "It's just business, Judge. Nothing is ever just business." She patted his hand. "Especially not with families like the Winthrops." The Winthrop estate sprawled across 10 manicured acres of prime Hampton's real estate. The main house was a colonial masterpiece, white columns rising 3 stories high, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Atlantic. As the driver pulled through the wrought iron gates, Elias straightened his tie. Miranda sat beside him, elegant in a simple black dress, her tablet never far from her hands. "Remember," she said quietly, "we're here to observe as much as to be observed." "I know the game," Elias replied. A valet opened their car door. As they stepped out, Elias took in the scene. White-gloved servers carrying silver trays of champagne, guests in summer linens and pastel dresses mingling on the vast lawn, a string quartet playing Mozart under a white tent. In every direction, portraits of Winthrop ancestors gazed down from the walls, stern-faced men and women whose fortunes had been built in shipping, railroads, and early industrialization. Elias noted that not a single face in those portraits looked like his. Crawford Winthrop appeared, clasping Elias's shoulder with false camaraderie. "Elias, welcome to our humble summer home. Come, there are people you simply must meet," with practiced grace. Elias allowed himself to be led into the lion's den. The first evening at the Winthrop estate unfolded like a choreographed dance, with Elias constantly aware of his role as both guest and outsider. Crawford introduced him to a parade of influential figures, senators, tech moguls, old money families whose names appeared on university buildings and museum wings. "And this is Elias Cross," Crawford would say, "the brilliant mind behind CrossTech. Did you know his AI healthcare platform is revolutionizing rural medicine?" Each introduction came with subtle markers, the slightly surprised looks, the too firm handshakes, the overly enunciated pleasantries. Elias navigated it all with the poise his mother had instilled in him, his smile never wavering. At the dinner table, Elias found himself seated between a hedge fund manager and Ainsley Winthrop, who had changed into a revealing evening dress. Miranda was placed at the opposite end of the long table beside Bradford. "So," Ainsley leaned toward him, her perfume expensive and overwhelming. "Harvard Business School. Did you feel out of place there?" Elias cut his steak precisely. "Not at all. Excellence tends to find its level regardless of background." "How diplomatic," she laughed, touching his arm. "But seriously, it must have been quite the culture shock from, where was it again?" "Baltimore," Elias replied, his tone pleasant but firm. "And the only shock was the Boston winters." Across the table, an older gentleman with a ruddy face raised his glass to Crawford's newest acquisition, both the company and its founder. This triggered polite laughter around the table. Elias maintained his smile, though it no longer reached his eyes. "The deal isn't finalized yet, sir. Crosstech remains independently owned and operated. For now, the man replied with a wink. After dinner, the party moved to a grand salon for drinks. Miranda finally managed to make her way to Elias's side. "We need to talk," she whispered. "I've been reviewing the new contract draft they sent over this afternoon." "And?" Elias asked, accepting a scotch from a passing server. "There's language buried in Section 12 about contingent leadership if quarterly returns fall below projections for 2 consecutive quarters. They could replace you, Elias, and the IP ownership transfers regardless of management structure." Elias's jaw tightened. "They're trying to buy the technology, not the partnership." "Exactly, and there's more." Bradford appeared before Miranda could continue, clapping Elias on the shoulder with too much force. "Cross, tomorrow morning you and I are having a private breakfast. Just us business minds hashing out the details. My father's generation loves these social affairs, but you and I know it's all about the numbers, right?" "Looking forward to it," Elias replied smoothly, though his instincts were on high alert. The following morning, Elias met Bradford on the estate's east terrace. A table had been set with an elaborate breakfast spread, though Bradford himself nursed only black coffee and a tumbler of what appeared to be vodka. "You've built quite the operation," Bradford said without preamble. "Impressive for someone with your starting point." "Thank you," Elias replied, selecting a croissant. "Though I'm curious what you mean by starting point." Bradford waved, his hand dismissively. "You know, no connections, no family backing, just raw hustle. It's the American dream, right?" "Something like that. The thing is," Bradford continued, leaning forward, "market anomalies like Crosstech need structure to sustain long-term growth. Your company's valuation has been, frankly, surprising to many analysts. Under Winthrop's guidance, we could provide the stability your investors will eventually demand." Elias set down his coffee cup carefully. "Our growth has been consistent for 6 years, Bradford. Our investor confidence is at an all-time high. I wouldn't call that an anomaly." Bradford's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Fair enough. But even the most brilliant entrepreneurs hit ceilings. We're offering you a golden parachute, Elias. 900 million reasons to let the grown-ups take over." The insult was thinly veiled, but Elias had faced worse. "I appreciate your candor, Bradford. It clarifies your expectations for this partnership." "Acquisition," Bradford corrected. "Let's not mince words." Later that day, the Winthrops organized a wine tasting in their cellar, a cavernous space lined with bottles worth more than many people's homes. Crawford played sommelier, explaining the nuances of each vintage to the assembled guests. "And now," Crawford announced, holding up a bottle from 1982, "we'll play a little game. Each of you taste this Bordeaux and describe what you experience. Most creative description wins this bottle." When the glass reached Elias, he swirled it thoughtfully before taking a sip. Years of business dinners had educated his palate, and he could identify the complex notes of blackcurrant and cedar. Before he could speak, however, a red-faced man across the circle laughed loudly. "I bet our friend Elias here has a real refined palate." The man adopted a mocking, exaggerated accent. "Yo, this wine be straight fire, dog. Mad tannins up in this." The circle erupted in laughter. Elias remained still, his expression unchanged as the room watched for his reaction. "Actually," he said when the laughter subsided, "I find it has remarkable structure. Bold enough to make a statement, but lacking the depth one might expect from its pedigree. It promises more than it delivers." His eyes met Crawford's directly, but perhaps that's just my palate. A tense silence followed before Crawford forced a chuckle. "Well played, Mr. Cross. Well played indeed." As the afternoon wore on, Elias found himself cornered by Ainsley near the pool house. She had clearly been drinking since breakfast, her movements loose and her voice too loud. "You know," she said, stepping uncomfortably close, "I've never been with a black man before." Elias took a deliberate step back. "Ms. Winthrop." "Ainsley," she corrected, following his retreat. "Don't be so formal. We're practically family now that Daddy's buying your company." "I think you've misunderstood the nature of our business relationship," Elias said firmly. Ainsley pouted. "Don't be so serious. I'm just curious. They say once you go, Elias, Miranda's voice cut through the awkward moment as she approached rapidly. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have that conference call in 5 minutes. Grateful for the rescue, Elias nodded. Of course. If you'll excuse me, Ms. Winthrop. As they walked away, Miranda muttered under her breath. I saw that train wreck coming from across the lawn. Thank you, Elias said quietly. That's what I'm here for. Saving you from drunk socialites and bad business deals. That night, unable to sleep in the overly ornate guest room, Elias stood at the window overlooking the moonlit grounds. His mind drifted back to his first major pitch, 10 years earlier. He'd developed a revolutionary algorithm for medical diagnostics, and after months of networking, had secured a meeting with 5 venture capitalists. He remembered walking into that boardroom impeccably dressed, his presentation meticulously prepared, and he remembered the dismissive looks, the interrupted explanations, the patronizing questions about whether he'd really developed the algorithm himself. They'd rejected his proposal, only to fund a nearly identical concept from a white Stanford graduate 6 months later. That night, Elias had vowed never to be dismissed again. He'd rebuilt his pitch, secured funding from a small black-owned investment firm, and launched what would become Crosstech's foundation. The memory still burned, fueling his drive. His phone buzzed with a text from Dante. How's the weekend with the Wolves? Still convinced this is just business? Before he could reply, another text came through. Whatever happens, remember you can be the man who climbed the ladder, or the man who built it. Elias stared at his brother's words for a long moment before putting the phone away. The next morning, Miranda cornered him in a quiet study. This has gone far enough, she said, her voice tight with anger. The contract is a trap, Elias. They've added 3 new clauses since yesterday. They're planning to gut Crosstech and push you out within a year. We can negotiate those points. Elias began. No, we can't. Miranda rarely raised her voice, and the force of it now made Elias pause. This isn't a negotiation. It's a slow-motion hostile takeover dressed up as a friendly acquisition. You're not seeing clearly because you want so badly to believe you've been accepted into their world. Her words stung because they contained a grain of truth. That's not fair, Miranda. Isn't it? Then why are you ignoring every red flag? The microaggressions, the contract changes, the way they talk about you when they think you can't hear them. Elias's jaw tightened. I've dealt with worse. This is how the game is played. No. This is how you lose everything you've built. Miranda's eyes flashed with frustration. You taught me to never compromise on the fundamentals. Crosstech's independence is fundamental. Your leadership is fundamental. Before Elias could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. A young woman with Crawford's eyes but none of his arrogance stood in the doorway. I'm sorry to interrupt, she said. I'm Clara Winthrop, Crawford's niece. Elias composed himself quickly. Ms. Winthrop, how can we help you? Clara glanced over her shoulder before entering and closing the door. I overheard your conversation, and I think you should know something. She took a deep breath. They're not interested in partnership, Mr. Cross. They want to own you, both your company and your narrative. What do you mean? Miranda asked sharply. The Winthrops don't acquire businesses, they consume them, especially ones founded by people they see as different. Clara's discomfort with her family's attitudes was evident. I've seen it happen before. They're planning something for tonight's gala. I don't know exactly what, but I heard Bradford and Ainsley laughing about it. Elias studied her carefully. Why are you telling me this? Clara met his gaze directly. Because not all Winthrops are the same. Some of us are tired of the family legacy. After she left, Miranda turned to Elias. Now do you believe me? Elias straightened his jacket, his decision made. Find out what they're planning for tonight. I want to be prepared. Later that afternoon, Crawford found Elias on the terrace. There you are. I've been looking for you. Crawford's smile was jovial, his manner expansive. I wanted to personally invite you to give a toast at tonight's gala. It's our way of symbolically welcoming you into the family, so to speak. I'd be honored, Elias replied, studying the older man's face for any sign of deception. Crawford clapped him on the shoulder. Excellent. It's going to be quite the affair. Senators, CEOs, even a few celebrities. The perfect stage to announce our partnership. As Crawford walked away, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something much more complicated than a business deal. The warnings from Dante, Miranda, Judge Willoughby, and now Clara Winthrop echoed in his mind. His mother's voice joined them. Own the room, Elias. It's yours if you decide it is. With the sun setting over the Atlantic, Elias adjusted his bow tie in the mirror. Whatever the Winthrops had planned for tonight, he would face it with the dignity his parents had instilled in him, and the strategic mind he'd honed through years of navigating spaces never designed for his success. The gala awaited, and with it, a turning point he couldn't yet see. The Winthrop estate blazed with light, the grand ballroom transformed into a glittering showcase of wealth and influence. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light over tables adorned with white orchids and silver candelabras. Outside, a line of limousines deposited guests onto a red carpet where photographers captured their arrivals. Elias stood at the entrance, Miranda at his side. They watched as Crawford greeted each new arrival, senators in tuxedos, tech moguls with trophy wives, celebrities whose faces graced magazine covers. Remember, Miranda whispered, we can walk away at any time. Elias straightened his cufflinks, silver ones that had belonged to his father. Not yet. I want to see what they've planned. Bradford approached, champagne in hand. Cross, there you are. Father has seated you at the head table. Quite the honor. His smile didn't reach his eyes. We've prepared something special for you tonight. Once inside, Elias navigated the room with practiced ease, shaking hands and exchanging pleasantries. He noted how conversations paused when he approached, then resumed with forced brightness, the weight of eyes on his back, the whispers behind champagne flutes. At precisely 8 o'clock, Crawford Winthrop tapped a knife against his crystal glass. The room fell silent as he took center stage beneath the largest chandelier. Friends, colleagues, esteemed guests, Crawford began, his voice carrying across the ballroom. The Winthrop family welcomes you to our annual summer gala. Applause rippled through the crowd. Tonight is particularly special as we celebrate a new chapter for Winthrop Enterprises. As many of you know, we've been in talks with Crosstech Innovations. Crawford gestured toward Elias with an expansive wave. Its founder and CEO, Elias Cross, represents exactly the kind of diversity and fresh perspective our corporation values in today's changing marketplace. A knowing murmur swept the room. Crawford continued. It's heartening to see companies like Crosstech succeeding despite the odds. One might even say these success stories validate our nation's progressive policies. He paused, allowing the implication to sink in. Of course, we at Winthrop have always recognized talent, regardless of its packaging. Elias maintained his composure, though he felt Miranda stiffen beside him. Crawford's speech was masterfully crafted, nothing explicitly offensive, yet riddled with subtle digs and insinuations. I'd like to invite Elias to say a few words later, Crawford concluded. But first, let's enjoy this magnificent dinner prepared by our chef. As servers delivered the first course, an elderly woman to Elias's left leaned toward him. You must be so proud, she said, patting his hand as if he were a child. My grandson did a report on you for his diversity project at school. How nice, Elias replied evenly, taking a sip of water. The woman's husband, silver-haired and red-faced, pointed to the wall behind Elias. Interesting coincidence, he remarked. See that painting? That's Crawford's great-great-grandfather with his household staff. The footman there, he indicated a black man standing stiffly in livery, was also named Elias. A chill ran down Elias's spine as he turned to look at the portrait. The servant stood at attention, eyes downcast, while the Winthrop patriarch lounged in a velvet chair. History has a funny way of coming full circle, doesn't it? The man chuckled. Before Elias could respond, Bradford rose and clinked his glass. Ladies and gentlemen, while we enjoy our meal, I've prepared a little entertainment, a tribute, if you will, to our guest of honor. The lights dimmed, and a projection screen descended from the ceiling. Miranda gripped Elias's arm in warning, but it was too late to stop whatever was coming. The screen illuminated with Crosstech's logo, followed by a montage of news clips about Elias's career. So far, it seemed benign, until the music changed. A jazz tune with uncomfortable minstrel show undertones began to play as Bradford's voice narrated, "The Elias Cross story," Bradford announced with exaggerated ceremony. "From humble beginnings to, well, almost one of us." What followed was a crudely edited video placing Elias's face onto clips from old movies, first as a shoe shiner, then as a jazz musician, and finally as a servant bowing deeply to white masters. The soundtrack switched to a song with lyrics about picking cotton and knowing your place. A wave of laughter rippled through the ballroom. Some guests looked uncomfortable, but most chuckled along, glancing at Elias to gauge his reaction. Elias sat perfectly still, his face a mask of dignity, though his heart hammered in his chest. Beside him, Miranda had gone pale with anger. "This is outrageous," she hissed, rising from her seat. "I'm shutting this down." She strode toward the AV booth at the back of the room, but 2 security guards blocked her path. "Sorry, ma'am. Private presentation." Meanwhile, the video continued, growing increasingly offensive with each scene. When it finally ended, Bradford raised his glass. "To Elias Cross, who's about to become part of the Winthrop family. Well, the extended family at least." Applause and laughter filled the room as all eyes turned to Elias. Ainsley Winthrop, visibly drunk, stumbled to the front of the room and grabbed a microphone. "Don't look so serious, Eli," she called out, her words slurring. "It's just a joke. You're practically family now." She paused for dramatic effect. "House family." This triggered another wave of laughter. Crawford approached Elias, champagne. Flute extended. "Your toast, Mr. Cross. I believe you had some words prepared." The room fell silent as Elias rose slowly from his chair. Every eye was on him, some curious, some amused, a few sympathetic. He straightened his jacket and walked to the center of the room with measured steps. Crawford handed him the microphone, a triumphant smirk playing at his lips. Bradford stood nearby, arms crossed, waiting for Elias to either humiliate himself with anger or debase himself with accommodation. Elias looked at the champagne flute in his hand, then at the sea of expectant faces. The silence stretched for 1 beat, then 2. Then with deliberate calm, he set the untouched champagne on a nearby table. "I want to thank the Winthrop family," Elias began, his voice steady and clear, "for this illuminating evening." A confused murmur rippled through the crowd. "In business as in life, we make choices about who we align ourselves with," he continued. "Tonight has been educational in that regard." Crawford's smile began to falter. "You've shown me exactly what money can't buy," Elias said, his gaze sweeping the room. "It can't buy class, it can't buy honor, and it certainly can't buy legacy." He reached into his jacket and removed the contract, the agreement that would have sold Crosstech to the Winthrop Group for $900 million. With precise movements, he tore it in half, the sound audible in the stunned silence. "My mother cleaned houses for families like yours," Elias said, looking directly at Crawford. "She taught me to recognize the difference between wealth and worth. Thank you for the reminder." He handed the torn contract to Crawford, whose face had turned an angry red. "I believe our business is concluded." As Elias turned to leave, a young woman near the back raised her phone, recording the scene. Miranda caught up with him at the door, her eyes shining with fierce pride. "That," she whispered as they walked out, "was worth more than $900 million. Behind them, the ballroom erupted into chaos. Embarrassed murmurs, angry denials, hurried explanations. But Elias didn't look back. He walked out of the Winthrop estate with his head high, the weight of false expectations falling away with each step. By the time their car reached the main road, Miranda's phone was buzzing constantly. "It's already online," she said, scrolling through notifications. "Someone posted the video of their slideshow and your response is going viral. Elias Cross is trending." Elias looked out the window at the passing darkness. "Call Dante," he said quietly. I need to go home. 3 days. After the Winthrop Gala, Elias sat on the front steps of his childhood home in Baltimore. The modest row house where he'd grown up now belonged to a young family, but the current owners had graciously allowed him to sit on the stoop when he'd explained who he was. "Take all the time you need, Mr. Cross," the young father had said, recognition in his eyes. "My kids have your poster on their wall." Dante arrived with 2 cups of coffee from the corner store where they'd once bought penny candy. "Thought I'd find you here," he said, settling beside his brother. "Mom always said this was the best thinking spot in Baltimore." Elias accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "I haven't been back here in too long." "You've been busy changing the world," Dante replied. He pulled out his phone. "Speaking of which, have you seen the news today?" Elias shook his head. After leaving the Winthrop estate, he'd turned off his phone and retreated to a small hotel outside the city, needing space to think. "The video has over 20 million views," Dante said. "And it's not just the humiliation part. Someone caught your entire response. You're trending worldwide." He handed the phone to Elias, who scrolled through headlines. "Black CEO turns tables on billionaire dynasty." Elias Cross walks away from 900ers after racist humiliation. Winthrop family faces backlash after viral video. Below the headlines were statements of support from black entrepreneurs, celebrities, and activists. The governor of Maryland had condemned the Winthrop's behavior. 3 major companies had suspended partnerships with Winthrop Enterprises. "You spoke for a lot of people who've never had the chance," Dante said quietly. Elias handed the phone back. "I wasn't trying to be a symbol. I was just done pretending. Sometimes that's exactly what people need to see." Dante bumped his shoulder against his brother's. "So what now?" Before Elias could answer, his burner phone rang. The temporary number only Miranda had. He answered cautiously. "It's me," Miranda said, her voice urgent. "Where are you?" "Baltimore. With Dante. What's happening?" "Everything. The Winthrop stock dropped 12% this morning. Bradford issued a clarification that made everything worse. And I just got a call from Clara Winthrop. She wants to meet. Says she has documents you need to see." "Can we trust her?" "I'm not sure, but she sounded desperate. Said it's about making things right." Elias considered this. "Set it up. Somewhere. Public." 2 hours later, they met Clara at a busy cafe in downtown Baltimore. She arrived wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, clearly trying to avoid recognition. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she hadn't slept much. "Thank you for meeting me," she said, sliding into the booth across from Elias and Miranda. "I wasn't sure you would." "Why are you here, Clara?" Elias asked directly. She removed a flash drive from her purse and placed it on the table. "Because what my family did was unconscionable, and because it wasn't an isolated incident." "Meaning?" "This contains internal documents about Winthrop acquisitions over the past 15 years. Tax structures, shell companies, hostile takeovers disguised as friendly mergers." She pushed the drive toward him. "They've been systematically targeting minority-owned businesses, acquiring them under favorable terms, then stripping them for patents and firing the founders." Miranda picked up the drive, her expression skeptical. "Why would you betray your family like this?" Clara's laugh was bitter. "Family? The Winthrops aren't a family, they're a corporation with a bloodline. I've watched them destroy lives for profit my entire life." She looked directly at Elias. "What they did to you was just the latest in a pattern. The difference is, you fought back." After Clara left, Miranda examined the drive's contents on her laptop. Her eyes widened as she scrolled through document after document. "Elias, this is dynamite. Illegal tax avoidance, evidence of bribing officials, internal memos about deliberately sabotaging acquired companies." She looked up at him. "If this goes public, Winthrop Enterprises will face federal investigations." Elias stared out the cafe window, watching people hurry past on the street. "We need to think carefully about our next move." That evening, they gathered in Dante's apartment with pizza and legal pads, strategizing. Dante's small living room was covered with sticky notes and printouts from Clara's files. "The way I see it," Miranda said, pacing the room, "we have leverage now. but we need to use it strategically. Dante nodded. What about launching something that directly competes with their pharmaceutical holdings? Hit them where it hurts. Like what? Elias asked. That AI healthcare system you've had on the back burner, Miranda suggested. The one that could democratize diagnostic tools for underserved communities. We could fast-track it, make it open access. Elias considered this. Winthrop's pharma division relies on proprietary algorithms to justify their price gouging. If we released an open-source alternative... Exactly, Miranda smiled. They can't sue us for it, and it would undermine their entire business model. Dante's phone buzzed with a news alert. You might want to see this, he said, turning up the volume on a breaking news report. On screen, a solemn news anchor reported, in continuing fallout from what social media has dubbed the Winthrop Gala incident, 3 major investors have publicly distanced themselves from Winthrop Enterprises. Sources close to the situation tell us that several board members have called for Bradford Winthrop's resignation, following his role in what many are calling a racially charged attack on tech entrepreneur Elias Cross. The report cut to a statement from a silver-haired man identified as James Westbrook, managing partner at Summit Capital. We've had concerns about the Winthrop acquisition strategy for some time. Recent events have only confirmed those concerns. Elias recognized Westbrook. He'd been seated at a nearby table during the gala, one of the few guests who hadn't laughed at Bradford's presentation. As the news continued, Elias's burner phone rang again. An unknown number. Elias Cross, he answered cautiously. Mr. Cross. The voice was instantly recognizable. Crawford Winthrop. I think it's time we spoke privately. I have nothing to say to you, Mr. Winthrop. I'm prepared to issue a public apology, Crawford said, his tone artificially conciliatory. A misunderstanding between gentlemen, blown out of proportion by social media. We can put this unfortunate incident behind us. Elias caught Miranda's eye and put the phone on speaker. An apology implies a mistake, Mr. Winthrop. What happened at your gala wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation of character. Crawford's voice hardened. Be reasonable, Cross. This benefits neither of us. The media will move on to the next scandal in a day or two. Why not let this die quietly? I'm not looking for silence, Elias replied coolly. I'm building a storm. He ended the call and turned to Miranda and Dante. They're scared. Good, Dante said firmly. They should be. The next morning, Elias received another unexpected call, this time from Victoria Jones, CEO of Obsidian Media Group, one of the largest black-owned media conglomerates in the country. Mr. Cross, she began without preamble. I'll get straight to the point. I want to offer you a seat on our board. Your integrity last weekend impressed a lot of people, myself included. I appreciate that, Ms. Jones, but I'm focused on CrossTech right now. That's precisely why we want you. Obsidian is launching a global initiative supporting underrepresented innovators. Your experience and your platform would be invaluable. She paused. Plus, it would send a message to the Winthrops of the world. After the call, Elias sat in quiet contemplation. His phone continued to buzz with messages of support, interview requests, and even acquisition offers from Winthrop competitors. The story had clearly struck a nerve beyond anything he'd anticipated. Miranda entered with her laptop. You need to see this, she said, her voice tense. She played a video of Bradford Winthrop speaking to reporters outside Winthrop headquarters in Manhattan. His face was flushed with barely contained anger. This has been blown completely out of proportion, Bradford insisted, adjusting his tie nervously. What happened at the gala was a private joke among friends. If Mr. Cross chose to take offense, that's unfortunate, but I categorically deny any racist intent. A reporter called out, What about the video showing your presentation with racist imagery? Bradford's face reddened further. Edited footage taken out of context. Furthermore, I have concerns about CrossTech's valuation claims. Our due diligence suggested significant discrepancies. Miranda shut the laptop. He's trying to claim we misrepresented CrossTech's value. It's a deflection strategy and potential groundwork for legal action. Elias remained calm. We expected this. They can't admit fault, so they're attacking our credibility. We need to respond, Dante urged. Not yet, Elias said thoughtfully. Let's see what else they do. The answer came that afternoon. A financial news outlet published an exclusive analysis questioning Crosstech's recent growth figures and suggesting the company had inflated its valuation to attract acquisition offers. Bradford's work, Miranda said grimly. I recognize the talking points from his private discussions with the Winthrop financial team. Elias smiled, a calm, knowing smile that surprised both Miranda and Dante. What? Dante asked, confused by his brother's reaction. They just made their first serious mistake, Elias explained. I expected character attacks, but financial defamation. That's actionable. And more importantly, it's provably false. He opened his own laptop and pulled up a secure folder. After our early meetings with the Winthrops, I had a feeling we might need insurance. So I recorded all our financial disclosure sessions. Bradford and Crawford both explicitly acknowledged our valuation models were sound. Miranda's eyes widened. You have them on record? Better than that, Elias continued. I had 3 independent auditors verify our numbers before the Winthrop discussions began. Their reports are ironclad and directly contradict what Bradford just claimed to the press. Dante let out a low whistle. So they walked right into a trap. Not a trap, Elias corrected. Just consequences. That night, back in his hotel room, Elias called his old mentor, Judge Willoughby. I heard what happened, she said when she answered. You stood your ground. Your mother would be proud. I'm trying to figure out the right next step, Elias admitted. This has become bigger than just me or Crosstech. Then make it mean something, the judge advised. Use this moment to build something the next generation can stand on. The next morning, Elias woke to news that the FBI had opened an inquiry into Winthrop Enterprises based on allegations of financial impropriety from multiple whistleblowers. Clara's documents had apparently found their way to federal authorities. As Elias sipped his coffee, watching the sunrise over Baltimore, his phone rang. It was the CEO of Meridian Health Systems, one of Winthrop's main competitors in the healthcare sector. Mr. Cross, the CEO began, I'll be direct. We've been following the situation with the Winthrops with great interest. We'd like to discuss a potential partnership with Crosstech, $1.1 billion, with guaranteed autonomy and board representation. Elias listened carefully as the CEO continued. And we'd be open to incorporating your vision for nonprofit partnerships and community reinvestment. Frankly, the stance you took has resonated with many of our shareholders. After the call, Elias met with Miranda and Dante at a quiet restaurant overlooking the harbor. Meridian is serious, Miranda confirmed after reviewing the preliminary terms. And they're not the only ones interested. 3 other companies have reached out with offers. What do you think? Elias asked her. I think we're in a position of power now, she replied. But we need to be strategic. The Winthrops won't go down without a fight. Dante nodded in agreement. They're already mobilizing their PR machine, and they have powerful friends. Elias gazed out at the water, his expression resolute. Let them try, he said quietly. We've survived worse. As the sun set over Baltimore, casting golden light across the harbor, Elias thought about the long journey from that row house stoop to this moment. He thought about his mother's unwavering belief in him, about Dante's community work, about Miranda's fierce loyalty. He thought about all the unseen barriers he'd navigated, all the rooms where he'd been the only one who looked like him, all the subtle and not so subtle reminders that some people would always see him as an outsider. And he thought about the path forward, not just for himself or Crosstech, but for others who might follow. The storm he was building wasn't just about taking down the Winthrops. It was about creating space for something new to grow in their place. We have work to do, he told Miranda and Dante, his voice filled with quiet determination. This is just the beginning. 2 weeks after walking away from the Winthrop deal, Elias sat in Crosstech's New York conference room, watching Clara Winthrop on a large screen. She appeared on national morning news, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she faced the veteran, anchor Thomas Reynolds. "Ms. Winthrop," Reynolds began, "your decision to speak out against your own family has sent shockwaves through the business world. What prompted you to take this step?" Clara took a deep breath. "Integrity," she answered. "Simply, for years I've watched my family use their power and influence to crush competition, especially from founders who don't fit their narrow worldview. Can you be more specific?" "The Winthrop Group operates through a network of shell corporations to hide their activities," Clara explained, her voice steady despite her obvious nervousness. "They target innovative companies led by minorities, acquire them with promises of autonomy and support, then systematically dismantle them, stripping their intellectual property and pushing out the founders." "Serious allegations," Reynolds Tuice noted. "Do you have evidence to support these claims?" "I've provided documentation to the appropriate authorities," Clara replied. "But what happened to Elias Cross wasn't an isolated incident or a joke gone wrong. It was a deliberate humiliation tactic they've used before." Miranda muted the television as the interview cut to commercial. "She's braver than I expected," she said, turning to Elias. "Going public like this puts a target on her back." "The Winthrops won't take this lying down," agreed Dante, who had temporarily relocated to New York to help with what they now called the response. "They can't touch her without making themselves look worse," Elias replied. "And she's just the beginning." The door opened, and Jessica Andrews, Crosstech's head of marketing, entered with a tablet. "The response to Clara's interview is overwhelming," she reported. "Social media is exploding, and we've received calls from 3 congressional offices asking about the Winthrop business practices she mentioned." "Perfect timing," Elias said, standing. "Let's move forward with the announcement." That afternoon, from Crosstech's headquarters, Elias and Miranda unveiled their new initiative to the press. The lobby had been transformed into a presentation space, with journalists from major tech and business publications filling every seat. "Today, Crosstech is proud to announce the Vision Equity Project," Elias began, his voice confident and clear. "An open-source artificial intelligence platform designed specifically to provide cutting-edge diagnostic tools to underserved hospitals and clinics." Screens behind him displayed the project's logo, a stylized eye within a network of connections, and images of rural and inner-city healthcare facilities. "For too long," Elias continued, "life-saving technology has been gatekept by corporations that prioritize profit over accessibility. Vision Equity will change that paradigm by making advanced diagnostic algorithms available to any healthcare provider, regardless of their budget or location." Miranda stepped forward to explain the technical details. "This isn't just a charitable initiative," she emphasized. "It's a new business model that proves ethical technology can also be profitable. Partners who build on our platform will share in its success, creating a collaborative ecosystem rather than a monopolistic one." What neither mentioned explicitly was that the Vision Equity Project would directly compete with Winthrop's pharmaceutical division, which relied on proprietary algorithms to justify premium pricing for their diagnostic tools. As the presentation concluded, a reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Cross, is this initiative a direct response to what happened with the Winthrop family?" Elias smiled slightly. "Vision Equity has been in development for years, but recent events have certainly clarified the importance of putting technology in the right hands." Within hours of the announcement, Winthrop Enterprises' stock dropped 14%. Investors, already nervous about the viral humiliation video and Clara's whistleblowing, began pulling out in droves. In Baltimore, Dante organized a televised town hall at his nonprofit's community center. The event, titled "Building Ethical Black Wealth," featured Elias alongside Black entrepreneurs, economists, and community leaders discussing systemic barriers in business and strategies to overcome them. "The goal isn't just individual success," Elias told the packed room. "It's creating sustainable pathways for the next generation. When I started Crosstech, I had 3 employees working out of my apartment. Today, we employ over 2,000 people, 40% of whom come from underrepresented backgrounds." The town hall was live-streamed, drawing millions of viewers and sparking conversations across social media platforms. Ethical black wealth began trending nationwide. Meanwhile, in the Winthrop family's Manhattan penthouse, Bradford paced angrily in front of his father. Crawford sat in his leather armchair, a tumbler of scotch in his hand, watching his son's meltdown with thinly veiled disgust. "We need to sue him for defamation," Bradford insisted, his face flushed. "Crosstech's valuation was inflated, I'm sure of it. We can prove Cross misrepresented his company's worth to drive up our offer." "With what evidence?" Crawford asked coldly. "Our own financial team vetted their numbers. If we claim fraud now, we'll look desperate and incompetent." "So we do nothing? Let Clara destroy us? Let Cross turn our name into a punchline?" Vivian entered, her heels clicking sharply on the marble floor. "The Sullivan fundraiser just called to request we don't attend next month," she announced, her voice tight with anger. "Apparently, our presence would be distracting." 3. Charity boards have also suggested I take a leave of absence. Crawford drained his scotch. "We need to control the narrative. Call Wilson at the Financial Times. Have him run a piece questioning Crosstech's growth projections. Suggest their sudden pivot to open-source technology is a desperate move to distract from fundamental business weaknesses." "Already done," Bradford replied. "But it's not enough. We need to hit harder." "Not until we shore up our own position," Crawford warned. "The last thing we need is more legal exposure." Bradford stormed out, slamming the door behind him. In the hallway, he made a call to a private investigator he'd used before. "Find me something on Cross," he ordered. "Everyone has skeletons. Dig deeper." The next morning, the Financial Times published a special analysis of Crosstech's business model, questioning whether its valuation was justified given its recent pivot away from proprietary technology. The article didn't directly allege fraud, but raised just enough doubts to give investors pause. Elias was prepared. Within an hour, Crosstech released its complete financial records for the past 5 years, along with endorsements from 3 independent auditing firms confirming the company's valuation. Bradford walked right into it, Miranda said with satisfaction, as they watched Crosstech's stock not only hold steady, but tick upward in response to their transparency. "He doesn't understand that we don't play by the same rules he does." Elias nodded. "The old playbook doesn't work anymore. Information moves too quickly, and people are tired of the same tactics." That afternoon, Elias received a call from Mark Turner, a former Winthrop board member who had resigned shortly after the gala incident. "I've been watching how you're handling this, Cross," Turner said without preamble. "I'm impressed. Not many could turn that kind of humiliation into an advantage. What can I do for you, Mr. Turner?" "It's what I can do for you. I sat on Winthrop's acquisition committee for 6 years. I have documentation on every company they've gutted, including evidence of contract violations and intellectual property theft." Elias exchanged glances with Miranda, who had been listening on speakerphone. "Why would you share that with us?" "Because I've spent 30 years in business watching men like Crawford Winthrop break every rule while facing 0 consequences," Turner replied. "It's time someone held them accountable." "And what do you want in return?" Miranda asked skeptically. "Anonymity. Until it goes to court. I still have interests that the Winthrops could damage if they knew I was talking to you." After the call, Elias and Miranda carefully reviewed the information Turner provided. It corroborated Clara's documents and added details about internal discussions that only a board member would know. "This is the missing piece," Miranda said, compiling the evidence. "With this, we have enough for a solid legal case." While the business battle escalated, Elias focused on rebuilding within communities the Winthrops had never bothered to notice. He funded technology labs in underserved schools, established a scholarship program for minority students interested in STEM, and partnered with Dante's nonprofit to create entrepreneurship incubators in 5 cities. Each initiative received media coverage, creating a stark contrast between Elias's community investment and the Winthrops' growing scandals. Public sentiment continued to shift in his favor, with opinion pieces praising his response to adversity. 4 weeks after the gala incident, the first major legal domino fell. FBI agents raided the offices of Winthrop Financial Services, a subsidiary that, according to Clara's documents, had been used to hide questionable transactions and tax avoidance schemes. News helicopters captured footage of agents carrying boxes of documents from the building while Winthrop executives watched in shock. By evening, the company's stock had plummeted another 20%. As these events unfolded, Elias received an unexpected invitation from the American Business Leadership Council, a prestigious organization known for its annual awards. They wanted to honor him as their Business Leader of the Year for his courage and integrity in the face of adversity. To everyone's surprise, Elias declined. "Why turn it down?" Dante asked when Elias told him about his decision. "It would be another blow to the Winthrops." "Because this isn't about awards or recognition," Elias explained. "Change doesn't come from trophies on a shelf. It comes from building something that lasts." Instead, Elias accepted an invitation to speak at his old high school in Baltimore, telling students his story and emphasizing that true success was measured by impact, not accolades. "The most powerful thing you can do," he told the auditorium full of teenagers, "is refuse to let anyone else define your worth. Not your circumstances, not your critics, and certainly not those who underestimate you because of how you look." As Elias continued building his response, the Winthrop empire began showing cracks from within. Bradford, increasingly desperate to deflect attention from the FBI investigation, launched a more aggressive campaign against Crosstech, claiming its open-source initiative was stealing intellectual property from Winthrop's pharmaceutical research. The accusation backfired spectacularly when Miranda produced documentation showing that Crosstech's algorithms had been developed independently years before any discussions with the Winthrops began. The final breaking point came when Bradford, cornered by reporters outside a Manhattan restaurant, lost his composure entirely. "This whole thing is a witch hunt," he shouted, his face contorted with rage. "Cross is playing the race card to distract from his company's problems. I'm not going to lose everything I've built to some street kid who got lucky with an algorithm." Someone recorded the outburst. Within hours, the clip had gone viral, adding another layer to the Winthrop family's public implosion. That evening, the Winthrop Board of Directors called an emergency meeting and voted to remove Bradford from his position as interim CEO. Crawford, watching his dynasty crumble, knew the worst was yet to come. The marble-columned Senate hearing room fell silent as Crawford Winthrop was sworn in. Cameras flashed as the once untouchable patriarch raised his right hand, his left resting on a Bible. Behind him, a row of attorneys sat stone-faced. "Mr. Winthrop," began Senator Lisa Washington, chair of the Senate Committee on Antitrust and Consumer Protection. "You've been called to testify regarding allegations of anti-competitive practices, specifically targeting minority-owned businesses for acquisition and subsequent dismantling. How do you respond to these charges?" Crawford adjusted his tie. "On the advice of counsel, I must respectfully invoke my Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Senator Washington leaned forward. "You're refusing to answer questions about your company's business practices?" "I am exercising my constitutional rights, Senator." "Very well." The senator turned to a screen displaying internal Winthrop communications. "We have obtained emails where you specifically instructed your acquisition team to, and I quote, find promising minority-owned startups where we can acquire the IP without the baggage of keeping the founders around long-term. Would you care to explain the meaning of that directive?" Crawford again invoked the Fifth Amendment, his composure beginning to crack under the relentless questioning. Elias watched the hearing from his office, Miranda beside him. Neither spoke as Crawford Winthrop, once the embodiment of untouchable power, was systematically dismantled by evidence much of which had originated from Clara's files and Turner's testimony. "He never imagined being held accountable," Miranda finally said as the hearing concluded. "No one at that level ever does," Elias replied. The congressional hearing was just the beginning of the Winthrop reckoning. The following day, a new scandal erupted when a video of Ainsley Winthrop at a private party surfaced online. In it, she mocked Elias with even more explicit racial slurs than at the gala, clearly unaware she was being recorded. The fashion brands and luxury companies that had once courted her as an influencer quickly distanced themselves. Within hours, she lost every sponsorship contract and was trending for all the wrong reasons. Meanwhile, Elias received an unexpected invitation. A consortium of former Winthrop investors wanted to meet with him at the very same Hamptons estate where he had been humiliated weeks earlier. The property was now in financial limbo as the Winthrop family's assets came under scrutiny. You sure about this? Miranda asked as their car approached the familiar iron gates. Going back there feels like giving them power. Sometimes, Elias said quietly, you need to walk back into the fire to truly leave it behind. The estate looked different in the cold light of business rather than the warm glow of false hospitality. Staff were minimal, the extravagant flower arrangements gone, the atmosphere subdued. The investors, 6 men and women representing major financial institutions, waited in the same ballroom where Bradford's offensive presentation had played. They rose as Elias entered, a show of respect notably absent during his previous visit. Mr. Cross, began Rebecca Wilson, a silver-haired woman who headed one of the largest investment firms on the East Coast. Thank you for agreeing to meet us here. We wanted to discuss potential partnerships with Crosstech, particularly your Vision Equity project. I'm listening, Elias replied, taking a seat at the head of the table, the same spot where Crawford had held court. As the meeting progressed, Elias noticed something on the wall behind him. It was the portrait that had been pointed out during the gala. Crawford's ancestor, with his household staff, including the black servant named Elias. During a break. While the investors reviewed some documents, Elias walked over to the painting. He studied it carefully, then took out his phone and snapped a photo of himself standing beside it. No longer a joke at his expense, but a powerful visual of how far things had come. Back at Crosstech, the legal team was preparing their most significant move yet, a $400 million lawsuit against Winthrop Enterprises for breach of contract, attempted defamation, and tortious interference with business relationships. The discovery process alone will be devastating for them, explained Sarah Mitchell, Crosstech's lead counsel. We have evidence that they plan to gut Crosstech's intellectual property and remove you from leadership within 6 months of acquisition, all while promising autonomy in the contract. Elias reviewed the lawsuit documents carefully before signing. Make sure this stays focused on their business practices, not personal grievances, he instructed. This isn't about revenge, it's about accountability. The lawsuit made headlines across the business world. Financial analysts began speculating that Winthrop Enterprises, already weakened by the FBI investigation and congressional scrutiny, might not survive the combined legal challenges. Bradford Winthrop, removed from his position but still a significant shareholder, unraveled further as pressure mounted. During a meeting with remaining Winthrop executives at their headquarters, his temper finally exploded in full view of staff. "I've given my life to this company," he shouted, pounding the conference table. "My family built this legacy over generations. I will not watch it be destroyed by incompetence and cowardice." When a young executive suggested they consider settling the Crosstech lawsuit to limit damage, Bradford turned on him viciously. "Settle? With Cross? Never. I don't care what it costs. I will not give that man the satisfaction of beating me." His voice rose to a scream. "Do you understand what's at stake? Everything my family has built for 200 years. An assistant recorded the meltdown on her phone. Though she was fired immediately afterward, the damage was done. The video, leaked to the press, showing Bradford referring to Elias as that man, with such venom, that the racial subtext was unmistakable. The final blow to Bradford's position came from an unexpected source: his own mother. Facing potential criminal charges for her role in Winthrop's financial improprieties, Vivian Winthrop agreed to cooperate with federal investigators in exchange for leniency. In her sworn statement, Vivian placed the blame squarely on Crawford, claiming he had orchestrated decades of corporate malfeasance while keeping her and other family members in the dark. "My husband built a culture of corruption," her statement read. "He taught our son that rules were for others, not for Winthrops." When Crawford learned of his wife's betrayal, the family's united front collapsed entirely. He filed for divorce, The same day, citing irreconcilable differences and disputing her claims of ignorance. The Winthrop dynasty, seemingly invincible for generations, was eating itself alive in full public view. As legal and financial pressures mounted, the Winthrop family made a devastating announcement. Their iconic Hamptons estate, the symbolic seat of their power and privilege, was being put up for sale to cover mounting legal fees and settlements. News cameras captured workers removing artwork and furniture from the mansion. The portrait of Crawford's ancestor and his servant was carried out, wrapped in protective covering, its significance now altered forever by its connection to Elias's story. Elias watched the coverage from his apartment in New York, a quiet evening alone after weeks of intense activity. On his coffee table lay his mother's old Bible, worn from years of daily reading, its margins filled with her handwriting. Beside it sat the fountain pen she had given him when he graduated from Harvard. His phone rang. It was Dante. "You watching the news?" his brother asked. "Yes," Elias replied simply. "How does it feel?" Elias considered the question. "Not how I expected," he admitted. "There's no satisfaction in watching someone else fall, even the Winthrops." "That's because you're not like them," Dante said. "You never were." After they hung up, Elias opened his mother's Bible to a page she had marked years ago. The passage was underlined. "For what shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul?" He touched the faded ink of her handwriting, thinking about the journey that had brought him here, from a row house in Baltimore to the center of a storm that was reshaping the business world. "We made it through the fire, Mom," he whispered to the empty room. The final chapter of the Winthrop saga came with the publication of Clara's tell-all memoir, The House That Humiliated Kings, Inside the Winthrop Dynasty's Fall. The book detailed generations of privilege, corruption, and the casual cruelty that had finally proven the family's undoing. The final chapter was dedicated to Elias, the man they couldn't buy. In it, Clara wrote, "In a world where everything has a price, Elias Cross proved that dignity and integrity remain priceless. By walking away from $900 million, he ultimately gained something far more valuable: the power to rewrite the rules that had been used against him and countless others." The book became an instant bestseller, with pre-orders breaking records in the business biography category. Review after review praised Clara's courage in exposing her family's toxic legacy and highlighting how Elias's refusal to accept humiliation had triggered a long overdue reckoning. On the day of the book's release, Clara gave only one interview, a thoughtful hour-long conversation with a respected journalist, known for her coverage of corporate ethics. When asked if she had any regrets about her role in her family's downfall, Clara's answer was simple. "My only regret is not speaking up sooner. Some legacies aren't worth preserving." At Crosstech headquarters, Elias called his leadership team together to discuss their path forward. The company had emerged from the Winthrop scandal stronger than ever, with new partnerships forming and the Vision Equity Project gaining international attention. "We've been through an extraordinary time," he told the assembled executives, "but this was never about the Winthrops. It was about defining who we are and what we stand for." Miranda, seated at his right hand, nodded in agreement. "So, what's next?" Elias smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that few had seen in recent months. "We build something that can't be torn down, something that changes the game for everyone, not just us." As the meeting concluded, Elias's phone buzzed with a news alert. The FBI had expanded its investigation into Winthrop Enterprises, with indictments expected against multiple executives, including Crawford himself. He pocketed the phone without comment. The Winthrop story was ending, but his was still being written, and this time, he held the pen. 6 months after walking away from the Winthrop deal, Elias stood before a packed auditorium at Crosstech's headquarters. Camera flashes punctuated the hushed anticipation as he approached the podium. "Today marks a new chapter," he began, his voice steady and clear. "Not just for Crosstech, but for how we understand the relationship between business and community." Behind him, a large screen displayed Crosstech's new logo, similar to the original but now encircled by interconnected lines representing community connection. I'm proud to announce that Crosstech is officially becoming a public benefit corporation, Elias continued. While we remain committed to innovation and growth, our corporate charter now legally requires us to consider social impact alongside profit in every decision we make. The announcement drew applause from the assembled employees, investors, and media representatives. This restructuring, rare for a company of Crosstech's size, legally bound the corporation to its mission of technology equity and education access. Some told us this would scare away investors, Elias acknowledged with a slight smile. Instead, our waiting list of potential partners has never been longer, because when purpose drives profit, rather than the other way around, everyone wins. After the presentation, Miranda joined Elias in his office for a moment of quiet reflection. PBC. Status, she mused, looking at the framed certificate. Your mother would be proud. She always said business should build bridges, not walls, Elias replied, gazing out at the New York skyline. I think we're finally living up to that. The transformation of Crosstech into a public benefit corporation made headlines across the business world. What surprised many observers was the flood of support that followed. Donations, partnership offers, and applications from top talent eager to join the company's mission. Meanwhile, in Baltimore, Dante's community nonprofit was undergoing its own expansion. With new funding from Crosstech's foundation and partnerships with local businesses, the program had grown from a single location to 5 cities across the East Coast. On a warm spring afternoon, Elias visited the newest center in Philadelphia. Children filled the computer lab, working on coding projects under the guidance of young instructors who had once been students in the program themselves. This is what sustainable change looks like, Dante told his brother as they observed from the doorway. These kids aren't just learning skills, they're seeing a future they can actually reach. How many are we up to now? Elias asked. Over 2,000 students across all 5 centers, Dante replied with pride, and 23 full-time staff, most of whom came through the program themselves. As they walked through the building, Elias noticed framed newspaper articles about his confrontation with the Winthrops. Is that necessary? He asked, gesturing. To the wall. Dante nodded firmly. Absolutely. These kids need to see that standing up for yourself isn't just the right thing to do. It can change systems. Your story matters to them, E. Across the country, Clara Winthrop was building a new life far removed from her family's toxic legacy. After the success of her memoir, she had used her platform to advocate for corporate accountability and ethical business practices. On a rainy Tuesday in Seattle, she met Elias for coffee. It was only their 3rd time meeting in person, but they shared a unique bond forged in the crucible of the Winthrop scandal. The FBI interviewed me again yesterday, she told him, warming her hands around her mug. They're building a comprehensive case against Crawford and Bradford. The evidence is overwhelming. How do you feel about it? Elias asked. Clara considered the question. Sad, in a way. Not for them. They made their choices. But for what could have been if all that power and privilege had been used differently. You're using yours differently, Elias observed. She smiled slightly. Trying to. I'm working with a policy group focused on corporate transparency legislation, using my insider knowledge for something constructive. That takes courage, Elias said, walking away from everything familiar. Less courage than you showed, Clara replied. I had the luxury of choice. You had to fight for every step. Back in New York, Miranda's contribution to Crosstech's success received long overdue recognition when Forbes magazine featured her on its cover. The headline read, "The Architect Behind the Empire, How Miranda Lynn Helped Build Crosstech's Revolutionary Vision." The 8-page spread detailed her journey from Harvard Business School to becoming one of the most influential women of color in the tech industry. It highlighted her pivotal role in both Crosstech's growth and its navigation of the Winthrop crisis. People always focus on the founders, Miranda told the interviewer, but successful companies are built by teams who share a vision. My partnership with Elias works because we value the same things, innovation with integrity, When asked about the Winthrop incident, she was characteristically direct. What happened at that gala was ugly, but unfortunately, not surprising. What was remarkable was Elias's response, refusing to be defined by their narrative. The article sparked conversations about the contributions of women of color in leadership roles that often went unrecognized. Miranda received speaking invitations from universities and business conferences, emerging as a powerful voice in her own right. 3 months later, Elias received an invitation to give a TED Talk. The topic, the cost of silence, the power of no. After initial hesitation, he accepted. On the day of the talk, he stood backstage, reviewing his notes one last time. The audience of 2,000 filled the auditorium, with millions more expected to watch online. 5 minutes, Mr. Cross. Production assistant informed him. Elias nodded, taking a deep breath. Public speaking had never made him nervous. Years of investor pitches and product launches had cured that. But this was different. This was personal in a way business presentations never were. When he walked onto the stage, the applause was immediate and sustained. He waited for it to subside before beginning. The most expensive words in business aren't, "We made a mistake," he started. This is just how things are done. For the next 18 minutes, he spoke about the subtle and not-so-subtle barriers faced by entrepreneurs of color, the courage required to reject systems designed to exclude, and the responsibility successful leaders had to create new pathways for others. Walking away from that $900 million deal wasn't a moment of weakness, he explained. It was perhaps the first time I fully understood my own power, the power to say no, the power to demand better, the power to walk away from a table where you're treated as less than equal. He concluded with a call to action. Success isn't just about climbing the ladder. It's about building new ladders and making sure they're accessible to everyone with the talent and determination to climb them. The talk received a standing ovation and quickly became one of the most viewed TED Talks in history. Schools incorporated it into business ethics curricula. Community organizations used it to inspire young entrepreneurs. Corporate training programs played it to demonstrate the importance of inclusive leadership. While Elias's professional life flourished, his personal life had taken an unexpected turn. During an interview about the Vision Equity Project, he had connected with Sabrina Taylor, a thoughtful journalist whose questions went beyond the usual corporate profile. Their first dinner had been strictly professional, discussing the future of ethical technology and Crosstech's new direction. The second had drifted into more personal territory, discovering shared tastes in jazz and literature. By the third, they both recognized that something deeper was developing. "I've interviewed hundreds of CEOs," Sabrina told him over dinner at a small restaurant in Brooklyn. "Most of them are so practiced at staying on message that the real person disappears. You're different." "How so?" Elias asked. "You actually listen," she replied with a smile. "And you're not afraid to acknowledge the complicated parts of your journey." Their relationship developed slowly and deliberately, both aware of the public attention it would inevitably attract. Sabrina's integrity as a journalist and Elias's commitment to authenticity created a foundation of mutual respect that deepened with time. 6 weeks after Elias's TED Talk went viral, Crawford Winthrop's legal team released a carefully crafted public apology letter. The statement expressed deep regret for any misunderstanding and acknowledged lapses in judgment while stopping short of admitting any deliberate wrongdoing. When reporters called Elias for his response, his answer was simple. No comment. His silence spoke volumes. The Winthrop apology, clearly drafted by crisis management specialists, was too little, too late. A transparent attempt to salvage reputation rather than demonstrate genuine remorse. As summer turned to fall, Elias returned to Baltimore for a deeply personal project. In the neighborhood where he'd grown up, Crosstech had funded the construction of a new technology education center named in honor of his mother, the Louisa Cross Center for Innovation. On the day of the dedication ceremony, hundreds gathered, former neighbors, local officials, students from Dante's program, and community members curious about the return of their now famous native son. Standing before the gleaming new building, Elias felt his mother's absence acutely. He remembered her working double shifts to pay for his first computer, her unwavering belief in his potential, her fierce protection of his dreams. "My mother never set foot in a technology lab," he told the assembled crowd. "She cleaned other people's houses and served food in restaurants to make sure her sons could have opportunities she never had. She built the man who built this." He unveiled a bronze plaque bearing her name and a quote she had often repeated. "Education is the one thing they can never take from you." After the ceremony, as the crowd mingled over refreshments, a teenage boy approached Elias tentatively. "Mr. Cross, I'm Marcus Johnson. I was in the first coding class your brother started 5 years ago." Elias shook his hand. "Good to meet you. Marcus, how's the program working out for you?" The young man's face lit up. "I just won the National Youth Innovation Prize for an app I developed. It helps people in food deserts find affordable fresh produce." He hesitated, then added, "I mentioned you in my acceptance speech. Said you showed me that our voices matter." As Marcus walked away, Elias felt the weight of his journey, from that row house in Baltimore to this moment, settle into perspective. The true measure of success wasn't in buildings or bank accounts, but in the doors opened for others to walk through. That evening, as Elias prepared to return to New York, his phone rang with an unexpected call. The White House. The president herself was on the line. "Mr. Cross," she began without preamble, "I've been following your work with great interest, particularly the Vision Equity Project. We're forming a Technology Ethics Advisory Council to help shape national policy, and I'd like you to consider joining us." The request caught Elias by surprise. Government involvement had never been part of his plan. "I'm honored, Madam President," he replied carefully, "but I should be transparent. I'm not interested in a symbolic role. If I were to participate, I'd need to know this council has real influence on policy." "That's precisely why I'm calling." "You personally," she answered. "We need voices that won't just nod along with the status quo. Would you at least consider it?" Elias didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. The conversation ended with a promise to continue the discussion after he'd had time to consider the implications. As his car drove through the streets of his childhood neighborhood, Elias reflected on how far he'd come and how circular the journey sometimes felt. From these streets to Harvard to Crosstech to the Winthrop estate and back again, each step had prepared him for the next, though he couldn't have known it at the time. His mother's voice seemed to whisper in his mind, "Remember where you came from, but never let it limit where you're going." 3 years after the Winthrop Gala incident, the New York skyline had changed. Among the iconic buildings that defined the city's silhouette, a new tower stood proudly. The Crosstech Global Headquarters, its innovative design combining cutting-edge sustainability features with aesthetic beauty. At night, the company's logo glowed at the summit, visible for miles. Inside the tower's top-floor boardroom, Elias Cross presided over a quarterly meeting, unlike any that would have been seen in traditional corporate America. The board members represented a mosaic of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, men and women of various ethnicities, ages, and professional paths. "The Vision Equity Project has exceeded our most optimistic projections," reported Dr. Aisha Williams, head of Crosstech's healthcare division. "Over 3,000 hospitals and clinics globally are now using our diagnostic platform, with documented improvement in patient outcomes, particularly in underserved communities." "And financially?" asked Robert Chen, the company's new CFO since Miranda's promotion to COO. 17% growth over projections, Dr. Williams replied. "Turns out doing good can be good business." Elias listened as each department presented their results and challenges. The culture he'd built valued honest assessment over sugar-coated reports. Problems were opportunities for innovation, not failures to be hidden. As the meeting concluded, board members filed out, leaving Elias alone in the spacious room. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows, taking in the panoramic view of the city where his business journey had unfolded. In his personal office next door, Elias had created a space that balanced professional necessity with personal significance. Among the awards and business mementos hung a framed photograph, the picture he had taken standing next to the Winthrop servant portrait. Beside it hung a modern portrait of himself commissioned by Businessweek for a cover story titled "The Year, New American Business Leader." The contrast between the images told a story of transformation, not just his own, but of slowly shifting power structures in American business. His intercom buzzed. "Your nieces and nephews are here, Mr. Cross," his assistant announced. "Send them in," Elias replied with a smile. The door burst open as Dante's 3 children, Zoe, Miles, and little Louisa, named after their grandmother, tumbled into the office with the exuberance only children can muster. "Uncle Elias," 7-year-old Miles exclaimed, running to the window. "Your building is taller than all the others." "Not all of them," Elias corrected gently, "but it's pretty tall." Zoe, at 10, the oldest and most serious, examined the awards, lining one wall. "My teacher showed us your TED Talk in class yesterday. All my friends think you're a superhero." Elias knelt to meet her eye level. "What do you think?" "I think you're a superhero too," she admitted. "You stood up to the bad guys and didn't let them win," Elias laughed softly. "You are too, you know. You just don't know it yet." 5-year-old Louisa tugged at his hand. "Can we see the robot floor again?" "Of course," Elias agreed, leading them toward the elevator. "Let's go see what new inventions the team has been working on." Later that week, Elias visited the former Winthrop estate. The property had been purchased by the American Historical Society, which had transformed it into a museum examining the evolution of wealth and power in America. A new wing focused specifically on the ethics of business leadership, using the Winthrop scandal as a case study in corporate accountability. Elias walked the familiar halls alone, remembering the night that had changed the trajectory of his life. The ballroom where he'd been humiliated was now an educational space hosting school groups and corporate ethics seminars. As he stood in the spot where he'd torn up the contract, a young tour guide approached, not recognizing him. "This is where the pivotal moment occurred," she explained, clearly rehearsed. Mr. Cross refused to accept both the money and the disrespect, changing the conversation about race and power in American business. Elias nodded politely and moved on, amused by the strange experience of hearing his own story narrated as history. Back at his apartment that evening, Elias began work on a project he'd contemplated for years, his memoir. The working title stared back at him from his laptop screen. "The Day I Didn't Toast." As he typed the opening lines, he found himself smiling. "No one tells our story like we do," he murmured to himself, his fingers moving steadily across the keyboard. The writing process became a journey through his past, the struggles and triumphs, the moments of doubt and conviction. He wrote about his mother's unwavering faith, Dante's moral compass, Miranda's brilliant partnership, and the countless small decisions that had led to that defining moment at the Winthrop Gala. He wrote honestly about the cost of success in spaces, not designed for people who looked like him, the constant code switching, the exhaustion of proving himself repeatedly. But he also wrote about the joy of building something meaningful, the satisfaction of creating opportunities for others, and the unexpected allies he'd found along the way. 2 months into writing his memoir, Elias was invited to record a message for the Global Entrepreneurship Summit in Nairobi. Standing before the camera in Crosstech's media studio, he addressed young entrepreneurs from across Africa and beyond. "There's a lot of talk about having a seat at the table," he told them, his voice resonant with conviction. "But sometimes the real power comes from building a new table and choosing who sits with you." He continued, "Your vision matters, your standards matter, and sometimes walking away from the wrong opportunity creates space for the right one to emerge. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even when the price tag tries to convince you otherwise." The message resonated deeply with its audience, many of whom faced similar challenges navigating business environments where they were underrepresented. Build Your Own Table began trending globally, inspiring conversations about entrepreneurial independence and ethical leadership. As Elias's influence grew, So did his circle of allies. Clara Winthrop continued her advocacy work, occasionally consulting with Crosstech on corporate ethics initiatives. Miranda Lynn became a powerful executive in her own right, mentoring women of color in technology leadership. Dante expanded his nonprofit nationally, creating pathways to tech careers for thousands of underserved youth. And Sabrina, now Elias's partner of nearly 3 years, challenged and supported him in equal measure, her journalistic integrity keeping him grounded, even as his public profile soared. Together, they formed a different kind of power structure, one built on mutual respect and shared values rather than inherited privilege or exclusionary practices. The final act in the Winthrop saga came unexpectedly. After years of legal battles, Crawford and Bradford had avoided jail time through plea deals and fines, though their business empire lay in ruins. The Winthrop name, once synonymous with old money prestige, had become a cautionary tale taught in business ethics courses. On a crisp autumn morning, Elias received news that would have once seemed impossible. Blackcore Global, the largest black-owned international investment firm, had acquired the remaining viable assets of Winthrop Enterprises. The press release announced a merger, not an acquisition, between Crosstech and Blackcore's technology division, creating the world's largest ethical tech coalition, with a combined valuation exceeding $12 billion. At the press conference announcing the merger, Elias and Marcus Williams, Blackcore's founder, shared the stage as equal partners. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. Two black CEOs reshaping an industry on their own terms, standing where the Winthrops had once seemed untouchable. This partnership represents more than combined business interests, Elias told the assembled press. It demonstrates what's possible when we value collaboration over conquest, innovation over intimidation, and purpose over power. The merger made headlines worldwide, with business analysts noting that it created a new model of corporate structure focused on both profit and social impact. Investment firms that had once dismissed such approaches as idealistic now scrambled to understand and replicate their success. That evening, after the press conferences and meetings had ended, Elias stood alone on the rooftop terrace of Crosstech Tower. The city spread before him, lights twinkling in the gathering dusk. Behind him, Sabrina emerged from the elevator. "There you are," she said, joining him at the railing. "Hiding from your own success party?" Elias smiled. "Just taking a moment to breathe. It's been a long journey." "Thinking about the Winthrops?" she asked perceptively. "Not really," he admitted. "That chapter's closed. I'm thinking about what comes next." Sabrina leaned against his shoulder. "And what does come next for Elias Cross?" He looked out over the city, the place that had both challenged and embraced him, where he'd faced his greatest humiliation and achieved his greatest triumphs. "I'm thinking about legacy," he said finally. "Not buildings or bank accounts, but impact. The doors we open that stay open after we're gone." The merger with Blackcore wasn't an endpoint but a beginning, a platform to create more opportunities, challenge more barriers, and redefine more possibilities. The very systems that had once seemed immovable were now proving malleable in the right hands. As the sun set over New York, casting golden light across the skyline, Elias felt a sense of completion that had nothing to do with wealth or acclaim. He had refused to be defined by others' limitations. He had walked away from a table where he wasn't respected, built his own, and created space for others to join him. In that moment, standing above the city that had witnessed his journey, Elias Cross wasn't just a CEO or a symbol or even a success story. He was, simply and powerfully, a man who had written his own ending. What would you sacrifice to preserve your dignity in a world that constantly tries to put a price tag on your worth? Like and subscribe for more stories about the quiet revolutions that change everything.